So we only need 3 then. Hey, Jason. I'll introduce you. You're going to introduce. That's right. Yeah. But you should definitely say something. Yeah, yeah, yeah. That's perfect. All right. Whenever you sit down, we're going to get going. Kick off. Jason, get mic'd.
Oh, if it's you're watching, you said you moderate from the podium, or
Yeah, because
Okay. Yeah, I'm just kind of through. Break the chair? Yeah, we can slide it back.
Do you want to invite, like, do you want questions? Who works very
Yeah, that's fine. That's fine. That's a good solution.
Do you want questions during this phase?
Nope. Okay. This is straight briefings, 5 to 7 minutes each.
Yep. Can you fix that slide? All right, ladies and gentlemen, I know we're tired. We've had a long day today. So let's get this final run of show kicked off. We have a little bit of a surprise, and it is my distinct honor to bring this gentleman to the stage. He has become a mentor of mine. He's someone that grabbed me and showed me what Georgetown values are and has taken care of me and made my experience here very, very special. And he is someone I look to for advice and someone who's leading Georgetown above and beyond what a normal dean does, in my opinion. He's no stranger to Afghanistan. He was the director of the World Bank for fragile and conflict-affected countries. Serving in Afghanistan, he's now the dean of the School of Foreign Service, Dean Joel Hellman.
Thank you so much, Tito. It's really, I should be thanking you for what you brought to this institution and this community. You and so many others who've been engaged, who met the call for action when faced with the incredible tragedy of the evacuation of Afghanistan. So it's been wonderful to have you in the community, and we've learned a lot from you and your engagement, so I appreciate that. And I apologize for kind of jumping into the show in the middle of it. I was not meant to be here. I was supposed to be on a plane to London, but that got canceled. And when it was canceled, I said I really would like to go and see and engage with you and really thank you for coming here to the Georgetown campus to talk about this critical issue. Just let me say a few words, because I know you've got business, important business to do with this fabulous panel here, to talk about your conclusions and your action items, which I think is the real exciting part of this day. Let me just sort of say first in response, I really do think that the rapid evacuation and de-escalation of engagement of the American and international forces from Afghanistan was a tragedy on multiple dimensions. First and foremost, it was a tragedy for the Afghan people that we are seeing before us in front of our eyes. Second, it was a tragedy for those who needed to leave Afghanistan for their safety and security, and look to create new lives for themselves outside of Afghanistan. And I know that that is a critical part of what you are doing today to try to ameliorate and support those who face that incredible challenge. It's also been, from my vantage point as someone who thinks broadly about international affairs, it's really been a tremendous blow to our ability to engage constructively on development in the most difficult areas of the world, conflict-affected states. And I think it has sapped the energy, enthusiasm, and engagement, not just in the United States, but across the world, of thinking about the difficult challenges of how to promote development in conflict-affected countries. So I think that we are dealing with the impacts of this tragedy across so many different areas that affect human lives, that affect American and international policy, and that affect how we engage around the world. So I couldn't be happier that Tito took this opportunity to bring together all of you on this campus to think through how to deal with these issues. First and foremost, how to continue to support the Afghan people as they face the challenges associated with that evacuation, how to support those who left the country and support their resettlement and their engagement in a fruitful life going forward. And how to think about what this means for U.S. and international policy and engagement around the world in these difficult cases. So we are so pleased to have you here. We're so pleased for the spirit and engagement that you've brought to us. And we are really eager to hear what you come up with in terms of actionable items. And I want to say that Georgetown University will stand with you and this community as we look for actionable ways of supporting this. We're thrilled to be supporting students and providing scholarships for students from Afghanistan who came into our community. Some who are still arriving, we're still waiting for them to arrive from various parts of the world. But we will continue that commitment. And I think that's an important commitment that we must make and continue to make. But we also want to make sure that we are part of the solution of thinking about how we engage going forward more effectively to support the people of Afghanistan and to support work in these difficult environments. So please count us as a partner as you develop your action items. And we thank you for seeing Georgetown as a place to come to think through these issues. And I want to thank all the people involved in sponsoring and putting this together, because I think it's such an important and critical engagement, not only for Georgetown, not only for this community, I think, but for U.S. and international policy around the world. So thank you very much. I wish you all success in the conversations that you're having next, and I really look forward to hearing what you come up with. Thank you very much.
So this morning we got together and talked about some of the big issues, and then after lunch, with your bellies full and everybody full of energy, you got together and came up with some solutions, hopefully. So we're going to roll through. Each group's just going to give a quick briefing. Our panel is going to observe, listen, think, and then they're going to talk for a little bit, and then we'll have a reception at the end of this following our closing remarks. So I appreciate everybody's patience today. We've dwindled a little bit, as conferences do in D.C., but thanks for being here if you're still here. And if you're part of Group A, Women and Girls in Afghanistan, please send your spokesperson up to give us your readout.
Okay, thank you very much for the organizers and all the offices, NGOs who were involved in preparing this one-day conference, and all the participants today. The Dean mentioned about tragedy leaving your country rapidly. I would add Afghans just leaving that tragedy every day right now. It's not ended, it's ongoing. I am Fatima Ahmadi, Afghan civil society leader committed to peace building and peace processes initiative in Afghanistan, and I'm currently serving as a fellow with the American University School of Public Affairs. I'm speaking on behalf of women and girls in Afghanistan rights, employment, and education, led by the Georgetown Institute for Women, Peace, and Security. Our working group participants included Pabasha Hassan, Dr. Ayesha Kadayofchi, Lima and Verveer, and Mujgan Yar Mohammadi. We are members of Onward for Afghan Women, an initiative of the Institute dedicated to alleviating and equipping Afghan women leaders with opportunities to continue our advocacy work on behalf of Afghan women and girls in America. I am sharing the following key takeaways and policy recommendations that have come up out of the productive discussions we have in our group. First, United Nations Security Council should reimpose the long-lasting international travel ban on Taliban leadership. UN travel sanctions imposed on Taliban leaders are among the last forms of leverage that international community has left, and the most potent source that does not implicate the Afghan people, and especially women and girls. Second, international donors should target aid and financial support to local civil society organizations and engage with local women-led organizations to direct funding and channel humanitarian assistance effectively. Alternative mechanisms for providing funding to local women-led initiatives, driven of effective lead distribution should be central contribution to the financial sanction efforts. The United States and international partners should strongly engage Islamic and regional countries in pushing for girls' education in Afghanistan, as they cannot effectively demonstrate the compatibility of girls' schooling with Islam. It is important to note that Afghanistan is the only country in the world where girls' education is not allowed, and no other Islamic countries ban schools for girls at the secondary level or higher level. There is no justification from an Islam perspective to prevent girls from getting an education. The international community must leverage the influence of Muslim majority countries in the region and model positive examples of women's educations, leadership, and agency in Islamic framework. The United States, UN, and international community should formulate and upload clear and red lines in response to the Taliban's actions, sending a clear message that human rights abuses and attacks on women and girls in Afghanistan will not be tolerated. The international community should ensure women's participation and inclusion in all engagements with the Taliban. The international community should also prioritize inclusion of women and human rights in all diplomatic and economic negotiations with the Taliban, including issues of girls' education, women's employment, and protection and security concerns. The US and international community should pursue parallel efforts in support of girls' education. On the one hand, leverage should be applied on the Taliban to formally reopen the schools. At the same time, the US and international community should appropriate funds to alternative education mechanisms, including online and modules of funding for Afghan women teachers in rural areas, so that Afghan girls can continue to learn regardless of the Taliban's decisions and political outcomes. They should also engage with Afghan women-led organizations, female-headed households as drivers of education provisions and human aids. Thank you very much for listening, and I hope we have some actions after this conference. Thank you very much.
Do we have a representative from Group B, the evacuations? All right. And anybody who's got their notes, if you can email those to the GFA team, we're going to compile these into a document when you're done. So that's okay.
We were working Group B, which was evacuation. We expanded the group scope a little bit here to be pathways out of Afghanistan, not just a little evacuation step, realizing that there's many pieces that go into that. So my name is Lauren Voss. I'm on the board of directors of No One Left Behind, and I was the facilitator, so I'm going to summarize what our group discussed today. So if anyone, which most of you have worked on evacuations, there's like 60 different problems that need to be solved. So one of our biggest things was to say, what are the key problems? What can we group together and say, if we can tackle this, it'll have cascading effects? So we came up with 5. The first one being lack of political will. In many cases, everyone here has solutions that would work, but right now the US government does not have the political will to actually move these things forward in order to make them a priority. We've seen that when it comes to Ukraine or various other priorities that Afghanistan comes later. So we really need an emotional narrative on that front. We need the push to make this a priority so that our ideas and solutions are heard. Secondly, the legal pathways to the United States or even resettlement in other countries are narrow, and they're getting smaller, as we heard this morning. Even if you fit in one of those narrow categories, we talked a lot about the fact that extended family does not fit in those categories. Thirdly, the immigration process itself, the pathways don't work well, even if you fit in one of them. It's a black box. You frequently don't know that your information has been received, that you're being processed. If something's gone wrong, you have no idea. So it's not even clear that those that do exist work. Fourthly, we talked about third country processing. Right now, the U.S. has made a policy decision that all processing must happen in a third country. You can no longer come to the U.S. and finish your processing here. So we have the USG system, which is very narrow. It basically has one lily pad, a couple other small places where people are processed, is backed up. Islamabad is backed up. And U.S. embassies and consulates around the world are taking a very, very long time to process people while they have to finance and take care of themselves. Fifthly, then we talked about the requirement of third country support by NGOs and private organizations. Because the U.S. pipeline is so broken, you have groups like many of the ones here today working the evacuation efforts. And so you have them doing diplomacy on their own, reaching out to countries, and those countries frequently say, what does the U.S. government say? Do they support you? Are they part of this? And you have all of that happening without the support of the U.S. government, where you have groups trying to decide, how can we afford this? How can we do the logistics? How can we coordinate with these foreign governments without, in most cases, any U.S. government support? So I won't call what we came up with solutions. I'll call it takeaways. I think some of them are tentative solutions, but obviously here there's a lot of political issues that pop up when it comes to evacuation. So the main one, though, is that we really need that emotional narrative to make this a political priority. And I think that's probably true across these different working groups. We've just seen the attention drop off of this, and we've seen the funding, the government support, the personnel all go down. And so, really having everyone focus on how we can make that emotional plea and make that emotional narrative to drive attention, funding, and resources is really what we need to do. And so if we can prioritize those efforts, then we can also start pushing for policy change, which is required in some situations. For example, a policy change to allow certain Afghans to finish their processing in the United States would be a huge win. It's just not politically feasible at this time. We talked about pathways, that there are certain pathways that could be expanded that may be politically feasible. So looking at those that have already been previously vetted based on their jobs prior, which is quite a lot of Afghans. Looking at those that directly supported the U.S. mission and that they have an ongoing threat of retaliation due to service. So there are ways we could look at groups of people that already have those categories checked and may be able to be prioritized faster. We also talked about just surging the processing capability and how that should be a major goal for the U.S. government, for all programs, especially P1 and P2, though. But we actually need to fix the processing. We talk about it being a black hole. The information isn't out there, so people don't know how the process works. What do I have to do at what step? How long is it going to take on average at each step? So we talked about how easy it would be to make information flow charts and checklists and even a contact list that actually works. All of that would be key for people and something that could be done without too much extra work. We also said the systems themselves are broken. So, there's not, in many cases, a system to move people from one step in the process to the next. We talked about, for example, the I-130 immigrant visa. Once you've made it to the point where you could be evacuated, it's literally an email system to say who needs to be evacuated versus being a standardized process. And there's many examples like that where the State Department just doesn't have the systems in place, and so it's requiring many, many people to do a job that should be simple. Finally, when we talked about third countries and the role of NGOs, we really do need a repeatable process in third countries or multiple third countries for different types of people. We're very happy when we get out small numbers, but looking at the number of at-risk Afghans we're trying to get out, we need to create that repeatable process. And quite frankly, to do that, as great as all of the NGOs are, we need USG diplomatic pressure. It doesn't have to be public, but we do need US government diplomatic pressure. We also need the funding and logistics to support this. And quite frankly, it would be from a government, whether it be the US government, or some of us have talked to other foreign governments who may be willing to fund some of this movement. We also have to work third country resettlement efforts because realistically, many at-risk Afghans will not find a way to the United States. And so we had members in our group from Canada, Great Britain, that were also doing these types of efforts. And we talked about the lack of coordination that we've done on that front and really trying to help what is the best pathway for people, and it's not always the United States. Finally, we said that we just need more coordination across our groups. It was just great to hear people saying, oh, I do something similar, and thinking about how we can share those best practices. So our group has shared contact info, and we will continue to meet. If you weren't part of our group, but you want to be, please find us, and we'll add you to the list. Thank you.
So off to a great start. Those are two really great panels who come up with some good ideas. Group C, Future of Afghan Governments, our spokesperson here. Have they come down? Yalda? There we go. So this was an interesting one. We put it in a room that had padded walls. No, I'm kidding. It was a good discussion, and it always goes to show you can put a lot of diverse people in one room with different ideas, and if you can keep calm enough, you can have a good discussion and come up with some answers. So there's one big problem, of course, standing in the way of future governance, and that's the current regime that sits there. But this is the future. So thanks.
Oh, thank you. We had a lot of conflicting views over the two main questions we discussed. So our group discussion was, as I say, concentrated over two main questions that I'm going to share the views of the group members. And the first question was touched on what is the ideal type of government for Afghanistan, if not Taliban tomorrow? What's the good system of government for Afghanistan? And these are the views that our group members shared. And the good thing about our group was that we had a lot of people who were highly engaged with the Afghan government, former Afghan government, and they shared their opinion as such. So many people talked about democratic, decentralized government that can perfectly work for, not perfectly, but work better for everyone in Afghanistan, a government that can have sub-national structure and people from various regions can elect their own leader and in their own provinces and can decide for themselves. They said Amir and kings have failed to govern over Afghanistan, so we shouldn't go after them again. Over the last century, the system in place have failed the Afghan people. So one of the issues in Afghanistan is that there were lots of political powers and opinion, but not any political parties. So, and we really need to bring some main political parties in the picture. Every minister would clean house, undo the gains of other people, and start from scratch. And that was one of the main areas that unfortunately we failed to come up with an institution and establishment. We need an institution and strategies and ideology that can challenge the one of the Taliban. So we also, our members talked about that we need a government that is approved by either Loya Jirgeh or an election, a government that can build a kind of laws and policies that aim to strive for the rights and prosperity of Afghans, all Afghans, regardless of their ethnicity, religion, and tribe. We need a constitution which is built by Afghan and can represent all Afghan voices. We need a system that run by establishment, laws, and acceptable system of government and elected leaders. And we need election, and everyone believes that elections are the only way forward. There must be a government that represents all Afghans. So for that, there were a lot of solutions, and as I said, as Jason also brought up, we went to very different direction. So there was a very huge, big discussion about our member of the group. But these are some solutions that people touched on.
We agreed that Loya Jirgeh was not the way forward. An election was agreed. The groups that agreed with that. Yeah.
Yeah. We said a selected loya jirga wouldn't work, that we voted for, we wanted an election, that the youth in the rural areas as well as the city centers would want an elected official or government, decentralized.
Thank you, Mariam John, for the correction. I have pages and pages of notes in here.
Intense group. It was the Afghanistan government trying to solve Afghanistan's issues in an hour and a half. So just imagine.
Exactly, yeah.
In the beginning that was canceled.
So for the solution point, people say fight and talk. If it's needed, fight. If it's needed, talk. So we don't go much deeper about that. So the Afghan people need, some believed and some disagree that Afghan people need warlords to fight the Taliban. And it's not for other international or other foreign country to help this time. This time is just for Afghan to fight for themselves. And some believe on that, some disagree. We need our supporters, like the United States, to have the value of human rights and the ones of women in their policy as helping Afghan. Because in the last 20 years, international development and reconstruction was highly focused on counterterrorism rather than realizing human rights of the people. So, and they believe decentralization is the key to mixing religion and politics in order to present the pluralistic Afghan government. NGO can be utilized to make a safe political space for people to exchange their idea. Outside group and like Afghan diaspora should work towards the safety of women and a political party. NGOs should help with the creation of political parties also. They should take part. Warlords are the warlords, and they are the one who fought in the 19s. They should be recognized as the warlord rather than leaders or heroes. And of course, we had conflicting views over this particular point also. War has a real and human cost. Afghanistan has suffered at the hands of foreign powers for centuries and must reckon with its history and people. They should open the embassy in the name of Afghan people and a government in exile. And again, we had conflicting view over that. And if they fail to do so, either in United States or another country, the government in exile should establish offices and begin to work toward the freedom of Afghan people. So they shouldn't wait for a foreigner country to come and create like a government in exile. The Afghan people must come together and establish a kind of like international think tank or NGO or somewhere that people from different backgrounds, whether it's intelligence, human rights, and other expertise, can come together and inject their solution strategies and theories into the current situation. So these are the solution ways that we came from. As I said, I have pages of notes, so I just came with some that we agreed most on that. Thank you.
Not an easy one to summarize, so thanks for putting that out. Group D, findings in supporting Afghans in Afghanistan. And we're just looking for 3 to 5 things. If you can.
I'll do it quickly. I'm Ron Smith. My first life was career Navy. Then I was a contractor with a handful of tours in Afghanistan. Mark Twain said, everybody's looking at me now. Mark Twain said, the 2 most important days of your life is 1, the day you were born, and 2, you realize the reason you were born. I submit to you that no one in this room has to question that reason anymore. I represented Group D, which was full of passion and brilliance, an awful lot of passion, by the way. We were helping humanitarian crisis in an economic collapse, and we added in a barbaric regime. We started by defining the Afghans. Initially, we were talking about evacuees, then we talked about those in country, then we talked about those with SIVs or P1, P2, and decided that we'll take everyone in country and in the diaspora. The risk is different, though, for those in country who are either holding paperwork or have been applied for and are being tracked by the Taliban. Families with women and daughters are far more at risk than other families with Taliban. Some of our ideas: funding. The Danish are using a very interesting system to support entrepreneurs. We'll use the Hawala system until a more innovative system is found. We can use the ASEAL community. We have different platforms of delivering cash. They must be innovative. They must be accepted on the international stage, and it must keep the Taliban's fingers out of them. The challenge also, besides cash, is getting food to locations so people get the food, not the Taliban likes. Farmers are facing a very interesting challenge because now with a meth program in Afghanistan, the poppy is not bringing as much money as it used to, so they may actually go back to growing wheat. We need to solve the bank cash problem and the transfer problem. This has been spoken about all day. We won't dwell on it, but we have to be able to have Afghanis to trade and have their finances accepted both in country and out. We can use, at the moment, Afghani nonprofit organizations to fund assistance programs. Pakistani NGOs are notorious for stealing, and they haven't stopped, so we might want to use fewer Paki NGOs. A new approach for our methods is using programs, IT programs, because interestingly enough, with all the barbarity, that the internet still works, everyone has cell phones, because that's the way the Taliban talks to each other. That's how they communicate with each other. But we had solutions from a very bright young man at his company is using at 18% overhead as opposed to 70% overhead from the World Bank. Okay, and then, which has been mentioned, and it's worth it again, how do we get the U.S. government, not this particular administration, but this government, to fund these solutions? Trash the Doha Agreement. Replace it with a new strategy. Develop a new professional class which includes women. And we probably had two potential and probable presidents for Afghanistan in our group. This group and this government have to champion young Afghanis. Thank you.
All right, Group E, Afghan insecurity and terrorism threats.
Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Geeta Bakshi. I'm a former agency officer and now the founder of a nonprofit that supports Afghan security forces here in the U.S. This topic is very near and dear to me, and I appreciated being part of a group and having a very thorough discussion on insecurity versus security and the threat of terrorism, whether it still exists. I think to start off, we kind of question, does the threat of terrorism still exist? Is the current Taliban government legitimate, or can they be legitimate? And more importantly, does the Taliban government pose a terrorist threat to the U.S. homeland, U.S. interests abroad, or to Western regional territories and interests? And in order to address that, the question that we came up with is, what is the capability, capacity, or willingness of the Taliban to address terrorism? Several points that we discussed that we'll highlight for you. Number one, we think we need to address the Taliban ties with regional and global terrorist organizations, everything from Al-Qaeda to the Haqqani network and numerous other regional terrorist groups, many of who have ties in Pakistan. The recent strike against Zawahiri in Kabul just a couple weeks ago, I think proves that there's still deep connections between the current Taliban government and groups like Al-Qaeda, which should be a major concern for the US government and for the international community. We also looked at the question of the Taliban once again allowing Afghanistan to become a safe haven for these groups, allowing them to build their capabilities. And the difference between 20 years ago and now is that these terrorist groups are a lot more sophisticated. There's a lot more education. There's a lot more military capabilities within these terrorist groups. And although the Taliban may be focused on Afghanistan and what's happening within its borders, the other terrorist groups like Al-Qaeda are looking outside into the Western world. So there is a threat to European countries. There is a threat to US interests abroad. And hopefully not the US homeland, but it's certainly something that we should be thinking about. A second point we made was to address the Taliban ties to regional governments who have their own interests, like Russia, China, Iran, Pakistan. These governments who are looking to gain geopolitical power and to keep terrorism outside their borders, thereby supporting the Taliban wittingly or unwittingly and helping terrorist groups through training, technical support, and other capabilities. The third point we discussed was the need to address current Taliban leadership and their supporters, individuals who were once top targets for the US government who are now in power, and former Afghan politicians, some of whom were engaged in corruptions, who were previously in power when the Taliban was allowed to thrive, and once again are now enjoying the freedom of the Taliban government. One point we made was that the Taliban did not defeat Afghan security forces. They won a political deal in order to gain power. And at this point, they have not kept up with many of the promises in that deal, including that they would address the question of terrorism, along with several other promises. We also discussed narco trafficking and how narcotics in the millions are supporting terrorist activities and allowing groups to thrive in Afghanistan. And finally, we addressed there is some US government dialogue happening with the Taliban. What does this mean? Is this a positive sign for the future? And of course, one of the opposing arguments to that was the Taliban is appeasing the US government and the international community to fulfill their own needs, that we should not look at change on the surface as change internally and thoroughly. So going back to the original question, is there still a threat of terrorism emanating from Afghanistan and from the Taliban government? And I think we all agreed in our group that as long as the Taliban continues to harbor regional and global terrorist organizations within their borders, the US government and the international community should remain concerned about the threat of terrorism. I'll stop right there. Thank you.
Can Kyle, Jason, and John start walking down here? And I'm going to give a quick introduction. I'll have them talk. Kyle, Jason, and John start coming down. We had two large areas of issues impacting immigration and resettlement, and they were those issues that impact Afghans, such as what's their status, applying for asylum, what's the clear path to citizenship. We haven't defined that for these Afghan citizens yet. Behavioral mental health, the intersection of employment, housing, literacy, and language. Rather than dealing with those four as four separate silos, we have to look at those holistically because we can't deal with the challenges unless we tackle all four simultaneously. Cultural integration, it's multifaceted, multi-year. It's not a one-hour class. It's not a one-month program. It is ongoing, continuous, and we need to make sure we have that focused. Then the issues that impact those who are trying to support Afghan immigration and the Afghan resettlement in the immigration process. Better integration between the Department of State and the Office of Refugee Resettlement. At the worker level, it's good. At the policy level, it doesn't seem to be synchronized. Helping the resettlement agencies adapt to the resettlement population and making sure the resettlement agencies are open to accepting that help. The need to help well-meaning organizations deliver meaningful help through networking, collaboration rather than competition. And then we need to get the Afghan Adjustment Act passed. It's a key piece that we as a government, we as Americans need to demand our government pass to give these people a pathway to citizenship. And I'm going to ask that our folks, 3 people, stand up 1 minute, going to give a quick issue and a quick solution. Please, Kyle.
Thanks, John, and thanks, everyone. My section of the working group took on the capacity issue of resettlement agencies and all those local organizations who are all here trying to help Afghans. And the main challenge that we all came to agree on was that we're just not coordinating. We're duplicating efforts. We're all trying to do the same things, facing the same challenges, but we're not working together at all. And the main solution that we propose, similar to all of the organizations involved in the evacuation, operating in silos, is that there just needs to be better communication, better coordination among the different organizations involved so that we can share best practices between organizations that have been performing in this sector for years, and to develop partnerships with all the new organizations that are developing, that have the passion and the insight and the Afghan knowledge to add capacity and provide as much support to Afghans as we can.
Afternoon, everybody. My name is Josh Teal. I was a former Special Forces commander in Afghanistan, now serve as a COO of a mental health company. So we came here today to see what we could do. So joined the mental health subcommittee today, and here's our ideas that we came up with the group today. So first is proactive. No one ever opts in for mental health, so proactive means you've got to call the whole population. That's both men and women. Proactive is where you find the unseen struggling, and it breaks down the stigmas, so it's absolutely critical. Next one is peer-based, right? So you can't handle the scale of addressing and calling the entire population unless you go peer-based. By peer-based, I mean non-clinical. Peer-based is someone just like you and me that has a little bit of extra training in how to be supportive and validate the person, right? And then collect the issues in anonymously, of course. The key piece with that we saw is this is also a jobs opportunity to pull in Afghans with any sort of medical or care providing experience to provide that job to then make the calls as well. The key piece also is currently in our current company, we use people that are kind of selected to be like that great aunt that you just can't hang up on, that really provides support for you. We found in this culture the respect for your elders, for people older than you. You get your peer support off siblings. That becomes very important when you match up who's calling who in a call scheme, right? Last one would be labeling, right? So when you're a normal company working branding, you got a brand, you got a label, right? The customer, you've got that brand, they buy it, they give you the money. It's a one-to-one transaction. For this, it's a little bit different because the labels, there's actually a triad, and that's donors, and there's tons of money out there for mental health and suicide, but not for other terms. Those terms come with the stigmas, right? That'll make people not use it or not talk, right? So you've got to use those terms, pull in all this money that's out there across the world for mental health, emotional support, mental health suicide, but then pull it into, is it emotional support? Is it transition support? Is it human connection calls? Some other label to break down the stigmas that resonates with the Afghan population. So I'll leave you with one thing, and that's Abraham Lincoln. The best way to know the future is to make it. So it's a pleasure to be here with all the makers. Thanks so much.
The topic that's been touched on a lot today is how we're engaging with the current regime sitting in Kabul is not really working. So the last finding is just a discussion about what that might look like. How can the diplomatic community better engage with the current regime to make some effects, or what needs to happen to change?
Slightly different from others. We also have a bag there, I don't know why. Well, we were a very small group, but mostly diplomats, former diplomats, especially thanks to Annie Forsheimer, my former counterpart, also a very capable U.S. Deputy Chief of Mission in Kabul, who did so much for Afghanistan and continues to do that. So she was our moderator, asked the question, and then we were brainstorming, writing down on different pages there, and they picked me to present. So how to engage, and we asked if we engage, what is the purpose of engaging with the Taliban? And why do we have to engage with the Taliban in the first place? Remember, the Taliban, half of their cabinet so-called cabinet sanctioned by the United Nations. One is blacklisted by FBI, and there's money on his head. Why the United States, a country that is so serious, so committed, and has put tens of billions of dollars into counterterrorism, is now suddenly engaging with a terrorist group which was right in the neighborhood of the presidential palace, in the house of Sirajuddin Haqqani, the blacklisted FBI guy, the Minister of Interior of the Taliban, had been given shelter and protected. And he actually moved from inside Pakistan on the other side into different provinces. And the months leading up to the fall of Kabul last year, and then eventually he moved to Kabul simply because he felt protected. He had been assured, because of the relationships and even marriage linkages between the Haqqani network and the Al-Qaeda leadership, the same leadership who masterminded 9/11 and killed 3,000 Americans and as well as citizens from around the world, including Muslim countries. We should never forget those 9/11 victims. It was very tragic to hear that the 9/11 museum was recently closed. It should not have happened, unfortunately, given a lack of resources. So, unfortunately, we came to say that because there's a lack of strategic will, political will, as one of the speakers here said, and which in the diplomatic terms put it, a lack of incentive compatibility, that a democratic nation, a developing democracy, somehow, unfortunately, was not considered by this administration compatible with the core national security interests of the United States. It's mistaken, unfortunately, given where Afghanistan is, and given where Afghanistan is the only nation which can give and has given the United States the honest, firmly committed partnership and friendship, and based on the values and interests that we share. So we agreed that this administration, unfortunately, as President Biden was talking about, shifting priorities, that we can simply achieve our strategic geopolitical goals elsewhere. Probably was thinking about Ukraine. That's fine. That's your business. But equally, Afghanistan is important. You cannot rule out the heart of Asia. If you think about our neighborhood, our geography, that's where the United States should be, not destructively, but constructively, as I pointed out here, engaging with Russia, with China, with Iran, with, of course, India is there as well, to help stabilize Afghanistan, based on a win-win platform where it benefits Americans, it benefits, Chinese, and the vision of President Xi. I've been to China many times, and I told Chinese, if you ever want to achieve, the vision of President Xi of, creating and building a community of shared future, you have to do it right in your neighborhood in Afghanistan. And the way to do it is really not to oppose the American program of, state building, because we have a strong nation, state building, but working with Americans. And I did that. They listened. But unfortunately, this administration didn't continue that regional engagement, engaging regional players to bring them, of course, on the stabilization side. So that's what we talked about. And then we said, what are the problems? We talked about ideological gap here, ideological differences. The Taliban do not represent Islam. They misrepresent Islam. Women, for example, have a very prominent place in Islam. Islam, as a salvation religion, was one of the early salvation religions, so monotheistic religions that restored the rights of women, the rights to, inheritance, the rights to run a business. The wife of Prophet Muhammad was a CEO of today's equivalent, and Prophet Muhammad, younger than the wife, was a, business manager, just a simple manager. That women also fought in the wars in Islam. But what part of the Taliban represent Islam? Absolutely not. But that's a misleading ideology versus us, Afghans, who culturally as a mountainous country, much like the Switzerland. I studied in Switzerland, worked with the Swiss. We were like Romansh, we were like Germans, Switzerland, like Italian, like the French. We have a strong core national identity, but we are extremely diverse, consisting of, plurality of ethnic groups. There is no majority, there is no minority, but we're all Afghans under this strong identity that the Taliban, of course, then reject because we demand democracy, not democracy superimposed from the West, but democracy that is born out of our own traditions, customs, and cultures, simply because we as a mountainous country, tribal included, are simply egalitarian. We're centrifugal. We ran away from the center. As a result, we need a decentralized system, which should work into our constitution. We should have been worked in our constitution. That didn't happen, unfortunately. So it's hard to negotiate. That's why the Taliban, we've been engaging with them for the past 4 years. Ambassador Khalilzad was brought on board. Unfortunately, he did so much damage to the American national security interests, and as well as, of course, Afghans. And as a result, now we've spent over the past year or so engaging with the Taliban, but they're not delivering on our basic expectations, which is, allowing girls to get an education. So then we came to the solution. Then what is the solution? And how can nations, NGOs, international NGOs can help? We talked about strengthening the United Nations Assistance Mission mandate. It is still weak. It lacks leadership. Doesn't, as we speak, doesn't have a leader. It's run by a deputy, a special envoy, a former German ambassador who's more into talking to the Taliban and keeping, these dialogues with them, as opposed to, empowering the leadership and then strengthening the mandate, and then for the P5 within the Security Council to come to a consensus on Afghanistan. Because right now there's not been a consensus. China wants one thing, especially China and Russia, versus, of course, the rest. So why we said that? We said that Afghanistan has now suffered for the past 43 years. Now, true that these countries, P5, have geopolitical interests, conflicting, unfortunately, but at least emotionally, like our other speaker was saying, that at least the US should push to say that this nation has bled for the past 43 years. They have suffered for the past 43 years. Yes, we engage in, we confront in Ukraine, we confront elsewhere, but not in this country because they have suffered. Let's give them a break. Let's give the UN the right mandate, and then jumpstart the peace process. So that this intra-Afghan peace process is started with a big push from the US, bringing the P5 together on this issue. And then subsequently, once there is a peace agreement that forms an inclusive government acceptable to all Afghans based on the Afghan constitution, and as well as the gains of the past 20 years, then they also deploy a multinational peacemaking force that consists of forces from the neighboring countries, so that they have the buy-in, they have the confidence, that they have the trust, with the US being involved. And then we also talked about the role of OAC. My colleague served there, Mr. Koistani. We thought that OAC could also help. I'll be done in 1 second because this part is very important. But unfortunately, they have not delivered. And finally, on the pressures, we talked about supporting national resistance, not resistance from any one ethnic group, but resistance, soft resistance. The women of Afghanistan, I really salute you. The men of Afghanistan, we haven't done as much as you have done. We should deliver on the battlefield, and the international community should support that. And then also, we should pressure the sponsor of the Taliban. The sponsor of the Taliban is who? A specific institution in Pakistan, not the people of Pakistan, but the military and an intelligence. You sanction Directorate S within ISI, which is running the Taliban. The relevant directorates and other ministries of the Pakistani government, including Minister of Foreign Affairs, sanction them. If sanctions have worked elsewhere, sanctions also work on the sponsor of the Taliban to get the Taliban to re-engage in this peace process and to, let the international community deliver the tangible results that Afghan people have been yearning, and that's sustainable peace and security. Thank you so much.
Thanks.
Thanks.
Is this mic on? All right. So we've come to the end of all the working groups. We're going to have a wrap-up panel. You've met our two Afghan guests up here today. I'm going to give you a quick introduction of Ambassador Verveer, who is the Executive Director of Georgetown Institute for Women, Peace, and Security. She has served as a U.S. Ambassador for Global Women's Issues, a position she was nominated to in 2009. She has coordinated foreign policy issues and activities related to the political, economic, and social advancement of women around the globe. So we appreciate your time today. I saw you digitally taking notes. So we're going to start with one of our video panelists that had COVID at the last second. But if we can cue up Lisa Curtis's video, she's going to talk and give her thoughts on this, and then we're going to run through the panel, about 5 to 7 minutes each. Then we'll wrap up and head to the reception. So thanks for your patience, and fire away.
Good afternoon. My name is Lisa Curtis, and I'm the director of the Indo-Pacific Security Program at the Center for a New American Security. I regret that I cannot be with you there in person today, but I would like to take this opportunity to thank Jason Howk, the Global Friends of Afghanistan, and Georgetown University for inviting me to speak. I would also like to extend my hearty congratulations to Jason and all of his co-organizers for bringing together this extremely important conference just 1 year after the collapse of the Afghan government and the takeover of the Taliban. As the country faces a devastating humanitarian crisis and the Taliban cracks down on fundamental human rights, especially those of women and girls, and continues to harbor terrorists, it is crucial that the United States reconsider its Afghan policies. And it's crucial that these policies are informed by Afghan voices. This conference has provided the opportunity for Afghans, U.S. and foreign policymakers, humanitarian workers, veterans, academics, and policy practitioners to come together and exchange ideas for creating a better future for Afghanistan. Today's program and working groups allowed participants to reflect on last year's chaotic evacuation and discuss ideas for completing those evacuations, since tens of thousands of Afghans who supported the U.S. mission and are now in fear for their lives remain trapped in the country. The discussions also covered resettlement issues and the challenges Afghans face in making a new home in the United States. They also discussed the humanitarian crisis, human rights, security issues, terrorism threats, and new ways to engage the Taliban. Now, I would like to say a few words on that last subject. It is now clear that the Taliban has not changed their policies either on women's issues or terrorism. Forbidding girls over the age of 12 from getting an education is barbaric, and such policies have no place in a civilized 21st century. As the UN Humanitarian Coordinator Martin Griffiths said earlier this week, it is incomprehensible that the international community would have to explain to any regime why girls' education is important. The Taliban's actions are unacceptable, and international policies must reflect this. At the very least, the UN travel ban must be reinstated for all Taliban leaders. If the Taliban are allowed to continue traveling abroad, the international community will be sending the signal that it is okay for the Taliban to continue to repress women and girls. The United States and other countries should take a lesson from Ireland. Ireland, just last week, stood firmly behind the travel ban at the UN Security Council. Ireland demonstrated its commitment to human rights principles, and it took a stand for every Afghan girl. The U.S. should also downgrade its level of engagement with the Taliban. Senior officials from Washington should stop traveling to the region to meet with the Taliban and instead rely on Doha-based diplomats to conduct any necessary communications. It should go without saying that the United States must also firmly oppose the Taliban's efforts to gain credentials to represent Afghanistan at the UN General Assembly. Finally, the U.S. must ensure that the $3.5 billion in frozen assets does not touch Taliban hands. I welcomed the State Department announcement 2 weeks ago that these funds will not be provided to the Taliban-controlled central bank. The establishment of an international trust fund is one option the administration is considering to get these funds to the Afghans who need it. Let me conclude my remarks here. Thank you for being here today. Let us keep meeting and working together to ensure that Afghans overcome the current humanitarian crisis and that Afghan civil society can preserve the rights and freedoms that both our countries fought so hard to achieve. Thank you.
Mr. Verveer, we're going to start with you. Your 5 to 7 minute wrap up and assessment. What are the big takeaways that you think we should
Well,
we should
I've been carefully listening to what my colleagues here at the conference put forward. And first of all, let me thank you and Tito for bringing us together and for making this the political priority it has to be. So that was one theme. It is vanishing rapidly from the radar screen that needs to have its presence on all of the time, that will bring political will to bear to do what is right. The tragedy that has occurred just in this year, building on previous problems, the Taliban clearly have not changed, despite all the rhetoric when they took over, particularly on women's rights, which they said over and over they supported the girls' rights to school, but they always added in the context of the Islamic code. And what that should have been a signal to those who didn't really pay attention to it was that it meant the restrictions that they are currently imposing. So what are they doing today? You heard just now about the serious situation for girls not being able to go to secondary school, restrictions on universities. Imagine girls who went to school with all of the powerful changes that took place over the last 20 years, with their aspirations extinguished. Their brothers go to school, the boys go to school, but for some reason the girls cannot go to school. And it's based on this Islamic code, which no other Muslim predominant country in the world espouses. It is the hijacking of Islam, but they are putting themselves in that coverage to justify what they do. Women are pulled out of the workplace, with few exceptions. They are not in government anymore. They have to be escorted every place by a male guardian. Their mobility is restricted. The Vice and Virtue Committee has replaced the women's ministry. So the Vice and Virtue Ministry has basically said women, how they dress has to be restricted, and their face has to be covered. And one can go on and on with one horrible violation of another, one more draconian policy after another. And in the end, what is this about? Making the women of Afghanistan invisible, and it is really a slow death. And we really cannot have this go on, and so we have to be smart about all of the report areas that were discussed today. The Taliban have not paid a price. They have not paid a price for any of this, nor have they paid a price for the other issue that was raised repeatedly, which is what happened with Zurari, and the fact that there in the middle of Kabul, in a wonderful neighborhood, the Haqqanis had him present after the devastating U.S. Taliban agreement, in which removing themselves from any relationship to Al-Qaeda was a centerpiece. So much for a centerpiece, so much for women's rights. The humanitarian crisis, 97% of the Afghan people are barely existing. We've got to do a better job in terms of where the support is going. International support is going in. We know that much of it is diverted. We know that women are not playing a central role in terms of those who need it most getting it. The issue of that Bennett raised this morning and that you, Mr. Ambassador, raised in terms of the role of the United Nations, in addition to strong leadership on UNAMA, stronger leadership out of the UN, the Human Rights Council. This morning when Bennett talked about the bleak picture of Afghanistan, I don't think he talked about the fact that the Human Rights Council has not set up a monitoring mechanism, which many of us have been calling for, nor a fact-finding mission that needs to expose what the Taliban are doing. And I also, on the issue that was raised on the AAA Act, the Afghan Adjustment legislation that's pending, it is absolutely crucial. But it's one thing for us to gather, it's one thing for us to call for action, but we all have to do our part, those of us who are in a position to do so in this country, to get Congress to act, because this is by no means a sure thing. And it is really tied up in all kinds of potential traps that will not bring the Afghan refugees the normalization of their situation that they desperately need. We did it for the Vietnamese, we did it for the Cubans, we've got to do it now on this. So those are just very few of the points that I found repeated coming out of the working groups, but those were critical topics that you all brought into this. It's a very complicated situation, and I think one of the biggest complications is how to engage with the Taliban in a way that they don't get what they most want: recognition, validation, access to resources, significant resources. The waiver for certain Taliban to travel is temporarily expired. There will be an effort to bring it back and justify its renewal. So there are many areas in which we have to work, but I think we've got to be smarter, and in the end, I end where I started, which is political will, political prioritization. And women in Afghanistan have been mentioned over and over. It is a fact that the well-being of women and the well-being of nations goes hand in hand, and the well-being of women in Afghanistan right now is desperate.
Absolutely. Political will. It's the watchword for today. Mariam, John, your 3 to 5 minute big takeaway. What do you want people to think about?
First and foremost, during a time where I feel like, if not most, probably all of the Afghans that are sitting here today have felt like they've been screaming into the void for the last year. We're screaming, we're yelling for our women, we're yelling for our country, we're yelling for our flag. And Georgetown opened their doors to us. And thank you, Madam Ambassador. Thank you, Jason, for having this event for us. I was part of the governance group, and it was a group of different individuals who sat down. Yourself, you were there as well. And we were trying to solve the problems of Afghanistan in an hour and a half. So you could just imagine the chaos that ensued in this group. It's unfathomable. But one of the brothers that joined us when we left, he said something to me and it resonated with me. Because what he wanted, what I wanted, what we all wanted was the same thing. He said there was an Afghan story of an Uzbek, a Pashtun, a Tajik. They spoke 3 different languages. They all wanted a grape. They were all asking for the grape in different languages. They were all getting mad at one another because, why aren't you giving me the grapes? The communication wasn't there. And I think that's one of the biggest failures amongst our community, amongst our government, and amongst our different political parties right now, our different organizations right now. We need to unite right now. This isn't a time for division. We might have different projects going on, we might have different ideologies, little things might make us different, but at the end, we all want the same thing. We all want, it's not a question of if the Taliban are gonna collapse, it's a question about when the Taliban are gonna collapse. And when they collapse, what are we gonna do next? Are we gonna be prepared? And as I said in that group, The warlords had their time, the technocrats had their time. If Afghanistan is going to get freedom again, I truly believe it's going to be on the backs of the women of Afghanistan this time. When you go into DC, we voted for Yalda John to be our president today. During the chaos, this woman managed us all, managed our time and everything. So again, Afghan women are diamonds. The pressure made diamonds out of our Afghan women. Again, thank you for bringing us all together because I missed my people. It made me miss my homeland. It made me miss my motherland, and I pray for safety. What is one point that I hope that everyone takes away is that just giving women education, allowing them to go to school is not enough. What kind of school will they be going to? What will they be learning in school? Will the school be more damaging to the women than not going to school at all? Are we going to be seeing female terrorists coming out of these schools? What kind of work will women be able to do? Is it just going to be midwife and teacher? Are women only allowed to dream about these two things? This discussion needs to keep going forward. It doesn't end today. And I hope that we get together more often. I hope the discussion moves forward because I believe truly that we will learn each other's languages. And at the end of the day, we all want the same thing. Let's put our petty dramas aside. Let's move forward. Let's get rid of the enemy. And once we have our flag again raised on Wazir Akbar Khan Hill, once we have our Milli Surud, our national anthem, once we have our identities back, once our Sikh brothers are safe, our Shia sisters are safe, once our women are free again, then we can discuss in our political parties. We're free to believe in what we want to. And that's the actual goal we all want. And I saw that today with everyone. Again, thank you for everyone coming today.
Ambassador Haidar, you have cleanup.
Well, first and foremost, I would like to thank Georgetown University. It's my alma mater. So Georgetown trained me to be who I am, a global leader, not just for Afghanistan, but for the whole humanity. And thanks to the Pedro Rupe Scholarship, to the Jesuit communities, a Jesuit university, and really, in the post 9/11, because of Muslim profiling was so rife, I couldn't find a job. And I had years of work experience with the UN, and then 4 years of education at Wabash College in Indiana, and I'm not able to get a job. So Georgetown embraced me, gave me a job, and I worked with President DeJoya lobbying for Georgetown, and then fundraising for the McDonough School of Business, and we raised the funding from former late Prime Minister of Lebanon to build this state-of-the-art facility. And then, of course, so many other students who have gone to Georgetown from Afghanistan who played leading roles in the Afghan government, at the National Security Council and elsewhere. And we appeal to the community here and the Georgetown donors, alumni network to continue providing these scholarships for Afghan men and women, those who are here, those who are still in Afghanistan or in other countries, are stuck, to come and prepare them for leadership, because the Taliban will have to go. They will have to go. We will fight them to go, and that would happen. So going back to our points here, the externality. We talked about the internal issues, but the fundamental problem, the matter of problems in Afghanistan is the externality of the security challenges, which we've been discussing throughout today. And here, the United States really, this administration, future administrations, have to go back to the bipartisan support that existed in the past, based on our shared values of democracy and as well as core national security interests, given the friendship which underpins our strategic partnership agreement, bilateral security agreement, which I ask you to read. Everything is laid out there. Go back and summon up the political will and the strategic will to return to the further consolidation of the gains the people of Afghanistan and the suffering women of Afghanistan made, to institutionalize them, and do it also through a regional approach to gain more and more regional buy-in, because it is in the best long-term interest of all of our neighbors that, of course, elsewhere have opposing agendas with the U.S., but at least on Afghanistan. I hear the U.S. could push, Afghans could push, we could go and appeal to their leadership, because even in Pakistan, there are people are really with the Afghan people because their own daughters are going to school. I am even in touch and have talked to the former military generals who, formerly even today, some cases support their policy, but when it comes to these issues, they do not, simply because they understand, that Islam is clear, that they understand that none of the OAC members, all Muslim countries in the world, have banned, education and denying Afghans basic human security for a nation consistent with its sustainable development goals to stand on our own. And all countries, in the United Nations, we discussed this, have agreed among themselves that in order for my country to develop on a sustainable basis, then I have to work on the SDGs so that the rest of the neighborhood rises and the rest of the world we develop together. And so for the United Nations to, especially the Secretariat, to play a leading role, for the Secretary General to be a much stronger voice for the Afghan people, not just issue statements here and there, but to push the Security Council, because the Office of the Secretariat, learning from the lessons of Kofi Annan, especially second-term Kofi Annan, who was really an activist and advocate Secretary General, speaking for the peoples, because the first verse of the United Nations Charter starts, "We the peoples." The Secretary General is mandated to speak up for the peoples. One of those peoples in Afghanistan is unprecedentedly suffering in ways that no other nation has suffered. For the UN to play that leadership, to bolster the mandate, to send the fact-finding missions, which Ambassador pointed out, and to act on all of those. Thank you.
Thank you. Round of applause for our panelists. I'd like to bring up one last speaker, and then we're going to close this out. And I wanted him to talk to you today so you can understand why we put this conference on, the heart of how this happened. He literally grew up in Afghanistan. His time as a young American was in and out of Afghanistan, 9 different tours. If you can concept what that means. He's a veteran. He's been a diplomat on some very sensitive missions. He and I worked on some of the same missions at different times. He's a Georgetown alumnus, and he used to look like Chris Hemsworth, so you can see what war does to one person. So Tim Torres, if you'd come down here.
I've never been compared to Chris Hemsworth. As we close out our first annual conference, I want to thank each and every one of you for not only joining us today, but for what you brought to the table. Your willingness to engage with one another and your commitment to the cause of the people of Afghanistan. Today has been a particular honor for me. As Jason shared with you, I'm a veteran of Afghanistan. I owe my life to Afghan translators I worked with serving in country. Those we got out and those who remain are with me every day. And every time I look into my own son and daughter's eyes, I see the possibility of their bright future. I'm reminded why I will fight with every tool at my disposal to ensure the same bright futures for the sons and daughters of Afghanistan. If you recall, we had 4 goals today. Number 1, to recognize the evacuation of Kabul. We heard Colonel Rahmani talk about how Afghans were helping Afghans. We took a closer look at the network of networks that came together of veterans and private citizens who put their lives and livelihoods on the line because it was the right thing to do. It was an honor to share the stage with them today. Our second goal was to inform. Getting as many refugees out of reach of the Taliban as possible was the preamble to a much longer resettlement journey. The American public remains woefully underinformed of the realities faced by Afghans who escaped the Taliban and those who remain in country facing crisis after crisis. The stories you read about from the lionesses of Kabul, some of the bravest people I've ever known, are the messages we must continue to share with the world. Our third goal was to motivate. Every single thing about each and every one of you in this room is motivating. I see all of you. Afghans, Americans, citizens from across the world who care. You represent private grassroots movements, large NCOs, State Department, DOD rank and file, and organizations that are understaffed and overworked. You stood up anyway to fight for what is right. You represent the best of what we can be. I see you, and I hope you see the incredible person to your left and right now. Finally, the purpose of the day is to mobilize. Thank you, Ambassador Verveer, and other observers for your comments from today's working groups. We are not going to solve problems in 90 minutes. But there needs to be real debate and discussion. If there is to be hope for a better future for all Afghans, you engaged with us, you are up to the task. Thank you. This story is one of networks finding each other in the darkest moment. At times, helping 120,000 plus individuals work through a complicated system, relocate, find homes and jobs, and reunite families can seem daunting. 40 million Afghans remain in Afghanistan today, facing famine, terrorism, and daily attacks on their most basic human rights. Competing messages range from silence to presumptions of ill intent and everything in between. The ocean of problems we face appear vast and overwhelming. So as we conclude our time together, I ask that you remember two things going forward. First, we cannot do this work in silos. The evacuation was one of the most unifying things I've ever seen. Even as some promises were being broken, people came from all walks of life, creed, color, to step up together. We came together as unified in a time of crisis, but this unification to fulfill promises to Afghanistan and ensure basic human rights for all its people must continue into the future. The people in this room started something that we will likely not get to fully realize. But it is this work today that ensures that someday in Afghanistan, where the recognition of basic human rights for all people is the foundation and expectation. My first message is clear. Welcome one another, work through factions, listen to ideas, and respectfully debate. If these problems are easy, we wouldn't be here 20 years later. Remember that we need one another even when we don't see the same solutions. My second and last message, remember that every Afghan saved last August who finds a warm home or a caring community matters. Every single one of them creates a ripple in that ocean of despair. Every time a lioness in Kabul fights for her rights, she brings those atrocities to the world's attention. Every time humanitarian aid gets into the mountains of Nangarhar, the plains of Paktika, or the desert of Farah, those are ripples. These moments seem insignificant, and progress at times is slow and frustrating. But these ripples create waves, and the impact of a single wave can and will resonate for generations to come. These future generations of children will be leaders here and in Afghanistan. We must keep pushing against injustice so that one day, these children, our children, will be ferocious and well-prepared, educated, inspired, lions and lionesses who were inspired by those who came before them, inspired by you. They are the vast ocean of hope. It has been an honor to see the waves of change that you have started. Thank you. Hoya Saxa.
There's no way I could wrap up a conference any better than the guest speaker that we've brought in to be the last voice, because you don't want to hear from me anymore. You can read me on Twitter anytime. So, Chris, if you can cue up the last video. We had to make sure that this person was safe and that we could share this video, but she was able to get out of the country. And so we're going to share this video. I met with 21 Afghan women protesters that are in Kabul on Zoom the other day and got to hear their stories and find out what they needed and what's going on as we're trying to collect more information about how to help. So, Chris, if you can cue up the last video, I'll let you listen to one of them.
20 years ago, we never could have imagined being in our mother's situation as she was 25 years ago and feeling their grief and pain. But in this time, it's harder and more grieving for us. It looked like my country is sinking into the past bay. Hello, this is Rashmin, and I'm a civil activist. I'm conveying to you the message of millions of people taken hostage by the Taliban in the geographical Afghanistan. As we are all familiar with the Talib group, and we know that each member who is called Talib can be judge, jury, and executioner on its own. These are some of the long list of the crime that this group has committing against women, against Afghan women, and needs serious attention. the destruction of all institutions supporting women across the country, closing all education institutions for girls above 6th grade, and complete removal of women from the community, politics, and economy, women's lack of access to their human rights, promoting and intensifying misogynistic culture, intensification of the forced and underage marriage, the arbitrary role of field courts against women, increasing incels of the female children due to the spread of the poverty, increase of the woman financial dependency on man, increase of the rape victim due to the war and insecurity. And according to this obstacle that the Taliban calls for women, women's struggle is based on the fact that the only way to confirm the Taliban misogynistic and steamrolling government and the patriarchal society of Afghanistan is the raise of these women by themselves. But unfortunately, our civil activities and protests are severely suppressed by beating, shouting, threats, being thrown in the jail, and even killing. Despite all these threats by the Taliban group, we have not surrendered. As a matter of fact, I'm one of the girls who have the bitter experience of the Taliban prison with the number of my like-minded people from the crime of seeking freedom. And they do not release us until they took written commitment from me and all my colleagues that we will not do any civil action against this group again, and we will not raise our voice, threatening us. If we do such a deed again, we and our family will be killed. The biggest demand of the Afghan women from the world is not to recognizing the Taliban, and the things that the Afghan women need urgent help are supporting literate and illiterate women to achieve financial independence, considering the increase in the domestic violence and vulnerable women need institutions and safe houses to protect and support them. And I want to say, if the world continues to only observe the situation of Afghan women, despite the end of the education process in this country, Afghan women will not be able to raise their voice and ask for help soon.
The lionesses that have been continuing the fight, we have to keep supporting them. I've been working on Afghanistan since 2002. There are times that I get tired, but days like this get me inspired again. This was a working conference. We said no ties because we want everybody to get down to work, and you did work today, and you inspired me, and I really appreciate all the effort you put into it. It made putting this together worthwhile. And I hope you'll enjoy the reception this evening. We've laid on a lot of great stuff and a good chunk of time for you to network, get to know each other. We're going to put out the videos from this. We're going to put out the statements from the working groups on this. We ask you to share that with everybody you know. Get in touch with your Congress members. Educate them. That is what is really lacking in this city, and that's why you don't get a lot of political will. People don't understand the issues. You have a role in that. Every one of you has a role in that, so please do it. And if you want to help child malnutrition in Afghanistan, make a $100 donation to ASEAL. You can find the ASEAL link on our Twitter site. That's the pinned tweet. I'll give you a free copy of the book. Scott Mann's here with his new book. He'll probably give you one too. But make a $100 donation. Come let me know about it. I'll give you a free book tonight. Thank you for coming. We'll go up to the back where you had lunch. That's the reception hall. So thank you.